Hi everyone. This and next week we're exploring Chapter 7, Positive Self. And as the title suggests, this chapter is about the concept of self. Now, there's a brief consideration regarding our own history of humanity, and for quite a lot of our human past, we have valued the supernatural and social order. Now, social order would be family ties or what your occupation is, what defined who you were. Or the supernatural deities defined who you were. Now, everyone at that time knew who they were, as they were rules and positions for everyone, set out by the gods, kings, or beliefs. Personal development, as we seem to know it now, the self-help sort of era, was not a thing at that time in the past. We didn't think in terms that I have a self, you have a self, and our selves are unique. So since it's become increasingly difficult to put faith in the supernatural or social order since the turn of the past century, people were increasingly forced to look elsewhere for values. It seems many turned to the self as a source of value. The self, since the turn of the century, has become an important focus in modern Western psychology and, by implication, for positive psychology. Self-focused concerns are of particular relevance to positive psychology, including self-evaluation, which underpins the two concepts we've already discussed in this class, self-esteem and self-efficacy. It also helps with self-regulation through the use of coping strategies and defense mechanisms, and those we're going to cover in part 2 next week. Now, to some extent, theoretical and empirical work on self-evaluation has privileged the notion of self as object, while studies of self-regulation, they have placed greater emphasis on self as a subject. Studies of self-evaluation show that high self-esteem, feeling good about yourself, and strong self-efficacy, confidence in your ability to achieve things, these two things contribute to our own personal strength and resilience. Self-efficacy and self-esteem differ insofar as self-esteem is concerned with judgments about the global personal worth that we have, while self-efficacy is concerned with judgments about specific personal capabilities that we may be able to do or not do very well. Self-esteem develops within a family context in which parents are accepting of children's strengths and limitations, and they set explicit, high, but achievable or attainable standards which they support their children to achieve. Self-efficacy beliefs are probably fostered by a similar family environment, but as they are more specific than the beliefs about your own self-worth, they are fostered by experiences, specific vicarious experiences, social persuasion concerning the performance of specific tasks, and conducting these specific tasks in positive physical and emotional states. Well, that gets us with a little bit of background of sort of where the self as a internal derision or directive of where our values come from back in the past when we were looking at things around us and the kings and deities. So this gives us a little bit of background. So let's carry on in the westernized countries. Before 15 AD, people's identities were viewed relatively fixed and defined not by your own personal choice and effort but by your individual, yourself's occupation, position in your family, position in their society, country, and relationship to their monarch, position in the universe defined by religious beliefs and relationships to their deities. Now, modern interest, as I mentioned in the introduction, is of the self and self-development arose partially through the availability of autobiographic writings and arts, questioning the prevailing faith in deities, monarchs, and values, the rise of democracy, and social and occupational mobility, the ability to move up or down the social ladder, literacy, and increased wealth of just the ordinary people, and the popularization of psychology and self-reflection all influenced our development of self. Freud, discovery of the unconscious, the level of consciousness beneath what we think about and are aware of. These all contribute to the idea that the self was more about self-knowledge and personal development. Now, we can and need to see the self as an object. It's also known as self as an agent. And there's a distinction between self as an object, which was first introduced by psychologist William James. This is back in 1842 when he was born, and 1910 when he passed away. So it gives you some idea of perspective of when this dialogue about the self being from within emerged. And so in William James, his seminal work, The Principles of Psychology, so within positive psychology research, there's been a focus on the self as both subject and object. So let's have a closer look at these. The self as an object. This theme is used as a foundational construct for social, cognitive, and behavioral and narrative psychology, such as self-concept, self-schemas. Schemas are like ways of thinking. They're like mapped out patterns of thinking. Self as a set of learned skills, self as a narrative, self as constructed in language, and the self as a socially constructed and culturally predetermined phenomenon. Well, that makes the self rather broad. So the two concepts to be aware of in self as an object, and we've been mentioning them throughout, is self-esteem, which is the positive evaluation of ourself and how we see ourselves, and self-efficacy, positive beliefs about our ability to use skills to achieve goals. Now, self as an agent, this theme is central to the theories of evolutionary traditions that highlight the biological underpinnings of the self as a conscious agent with the capacity to perceive, learn, communicate, and adapt to the environment. The self as an agent theme also underpins the psychoanalytic concepts. Now, when you hear psychoanalytic, think Freud. So his work of the self as motivating to achieve conflicting goals such as aggressive self, preservation, sexual self-reproduction, and social cooperation. Now, additional concepts relevant to the self as an agent, well, they include self-regulation. This is the capacity that we have to regulate and manage our emotions. And we can include adaptive, defensive mechanisms. These are the unconscious strategies. These aren't the ones you think about. These are the ones that emerge to deal with things that we don't think to come into it. Now, these are unconscious strategies for managing the intrapsychic conflict that exists within us all. And then there's the functioning coping strategies. These are the conscious strategies. So unlike the adaptive mechanisms, the functional mechanisms are conscious. These strategies are the ones we use to deal with the external demands, and we make choices about these. Okay. Now, as mentioned above, self-esteem is connected to the self as an object. And as I mentioned, in about 1890, William James defined self-esteem as the feeling of self-worth that derives from the ratio of our actual successes to our pretensions or our estimations of our potential success. Now, this, of course, will vary from person to person. Now, self-worth is based on a comparison of how we are and how we aspire to be in the future. So our present self and our future self. Self-esteem is hierarchically organized, with overall global self-esteem based on general judgments of self-worth. And beneath this, there are subtypes of self-esteem based on evaluations of self-worth in the family, our self-worth that we evaluate in school, work setting, leisure settings, and peer groups. And that may not all be the same. So if we were thoughtful about how do we make improvements, what do we do to develop our self-esteem? Where does it come from in the beginning of it all? Well, twin studies show that self-esteem is about 40% heritable. That just means about 40% of who we feel about ourselves comes from our genetic pool. However, that would suggest the environment around us has a big influence, and self-esteem follows a well-defined trajectory over the lifespan. And you can see that beside me, where the data from over 300 international longitudinal studies show the similar increase over time with an abrupt and somewhat down at the very end portion of our lives. Parents are the primary for children in development of self-esteem. Of course, firstly, it's to the genetic component that parents contribute. And secondly, parents are there 24/7 with their children. They are a major part of. Therefore, it would be considered very useful for parents to help children to be more likely to develop high self-esteem. And the following are some conditions that affect families and their ability to nurture their children into developing positive self-esteem. So one of the main things is families with economic security. The more there is an economic security, there's more freedom to dedicate to children in other areas aside from just managing the finances. In families where both parents are present and have good relationships, increases the likelihood that children will grow up with good self-esteem. Where their mothers do not suffer from depression. Interesting that it's only the mothers that get, because they're predominantly involved in children in the younger age, but I think that's changing within family dynamics where more men or more fathers are taking a role in the raising of their children. Where they experience parental warmth and emotional support, intellectual stimulation, and support for the development of autonomy. These are conditions that are helpful for the development of self-esteem. These, we can see, can be helpful. However, this does not represent everyone. Therefore, self-esteem is a little precarious for some. We can now probably see why there are many individual differences in self-esteem in relatively stable over a lifespan. Meta-analysis, that's the study of studies, to remind you, show that self-esteem improvement programs for both children and adults are effective at increasing self-esteem. Self-esteem predicts success and well-being in life in important domains, and in particular, relationships, education, work, and health. Positive relationships enhances self-esteem, and high levels of self-esteem have beneficial effects on relationships. Stressful life events such as having a serious accident, contracting a chronic disease, or suffering criminal victimization have a negative impact on self-esteem. While work success and socioeconomic status are associated with self-esteem, longitudinal studies show that they have a limited causal impact on self-esteem. Defensive self-esteem, and that's not something you've likely heard. Now, some people report high self-esteem as a defense against negative social evaluation. Now, based on this self-esteem assessment tool, it's labeled, or it's called, the Multidimensional Self-Esteem Inventory for Adults. It includes a subscale for assessing defensive self-esteem enhancement. So we won't be considering this particular inventory, so not to worry, but I wanted you to be aware. Defensive high self-esteem may be characterized by bragging, criticizing others, and extremely sensitivity to personal criticism on the one hand, or immersion in work and responding to criticisms with inappropriate aggression on the other. These profiles are quite different from the depressed, anxious, or socially withdrawn person with low self-esteem, but nevertheless, they may reflect an underlying and unreported low sense of self-worth. It's possible it could be like a false vibrato. I'm not this strong or good at things, but I'll make it sound like I am to protect myself. So let's look at how we can improve our self-esteem. To consider improving our self-esteem, how well do we feel about ourselves, is encouraging, as many of us would like to think things could always be better. Like many concepts in positive psychology, self-esteem is teachable and learnable. Our text emphasizes 3 groups of strategies: skill training, environmental changes, and CBT, or cognitive behavior therapy, along with mindfulness meditations. We'll start with skill training. Training in the problem-solving skills, social skills, assertiveness skills, academic skills, and work-related skills. These may increase self-esteem associated with low competency, that is, the ability in these areas. So by improving our abilities in those areas can increase self-esteem. Some of the environmental changes, where a low sense of self-esteem derives from either poverty or social disadvantage, environmental changes such as occupational retraining, occupational placement, or social relocation to a less disadvantaged area may really enhance self-esteem. The third grouping are the CBT, the cognitive behavior training, and mindfulness. This is where a low sense of worthlessness is due to an unrealistically high aspirations. Despite a realistic level of achievement, cognitive therapy may be a big help here in challenging our high standards, or mindfulness training may facilitate an acceptance of self-critical thoughts that are just transient rather than accurate representations of reality. Remember, thoughts are not facts. Now, next we can move into some of work by Robert Bandura on self-efficacy. He's the originator of self-efficacy theory, which he states, perceived self-efficacy refers to our belief about our capacity to perform tasks to achieve specific goals. These efficacy beliefs are what lead us through our lives, essentially making choices of actions every day that we believe will lead to our desired outcome, while at the same time we are not incentivized to behave in ways which we believe will result in failure. So basically, to repeat, our efficacy beliefs are equivalent other than our judgment about capabilities. If we expect to be successful and achieve our desired outcomes, then this acts as an incentive to perform the action. Alternatively, if we expect failure, well, this is going to act as a disincentive. I'm going to use an example that you see in your text on how this theory may work in real life. Now, I'll firstly clarify some terms of this model, then use the text example before moving on with more on self-efficacy. The overall strength of self-efficacy belief is influenced by mastery, being really good at something, social models of success, social persuasion, and emotional and physical states. Okay, mastery. It refers to past experiences of successful task completion. If you've done it a lot and you've done it well, then you have mastery. Social models of success, they refer to having viewed others achieve successful task completion. I don't need to know the stove is hot. I just need to see somebody else touch it to know whether it's hot or not. So social models is looking at vicarious learning, seeing people who look and act like you do the same thing that you were trying to do. Social persuasion refers to the process such as being coached to perform better. And then positive emotional and physiological states such as excitement and joy have a positive impact on self-efficacy beliefs. Now, these four factors fall on a continuum in terms of their impact on self-efficacy beliefs, with mastery having the greatest impact. In figure 3.3, this sequence is represented by the pathway from self-efficacy beliefs through outcome expectations to performance. So, for example, if I judge myself as capable of sailing my 14-foot boat around a race course in a 25-mile-an-hour wind, then this is self-efficacy belief. The anticipated physical pleasure of coming ashore after the exertion of doing so and winning a sailing race, the social approval of the other competitors for winning and the self-satisfaction are physical, social, and self-evaluative positive outcome expectations, respectively. The act of sailing around the course is a performance that is distinct from the outcome, which follows the successful performance. The impact of self-efficacy beliefs on performance is also mediated by the goal. Now, for example, aiming to win a sailing race would be a goal, and the socio-structural factors that may facilitate or impede my performance, for example, the competitiveness of our boat in the comparison with that of the other competitors in the race. The overall strength of self-efficacy beliefs is influenced by factors or sources of self-efficacy, as in figure 7.3, there we go, as mastery, social models of success, social persuasion, and emotional and physical states. Mastery refers to the past experience of successful task completion. Maybe I've won previous sailing races. Social modes of success refer to having viewed others achieve successful tasks to completion. So, for example, I've maybe watched other expert sailors win similar sailing race. This process of developing self-efficacy beliefs by watching others' successes is often referred to as vicarious learning. Social persuasion refers to processes such as being coached to perform better. Positive emotion and physiological states such as excitement and joy have a positive impact on social efficacy beliefs, whereas negative emotions and related psychological states such as fear and extremely high levels of physiological arousal, being anxious, having an adverse effect on self-efficacy. It is far easier to believe that winning a sailing race is possible when feeling happy and excited than when feeling frightened and panicky. Mastery, social models of success, social persuasion, emotional and physical states fall on a continuum in terms of their impact on our self-efficacy. Mastery has the greatest impact, and emotional and physical states have the smallest impact. Self-efficacy and self-esteem differ insofar as self-esteem is concerned with the judgment about our personal worth, and self-efficacy is concerned with judgments about our personal capabilities. These are independent constructs, Whereas self-esteem affects our general mood, self-efficacy beliefs about our abilities to succeed at specific tasks determine how well we perform these tasks. So, what can we expect as outcomes of self-efficacy? Self-efficacy beliefs regulate functioning via cognitive, motivational, emotional, and choices process. We'll just review some of the more positive outcomes more quickly here. So some of the correlates to cognitive. Remember, cognitive is just our thinking, how we think about things. So with our thinking or cognitive, what correlates, what exists at the same time, but does it get caused? Well, there's greater cognitive resourcefulness is one. We become more rich with ideas. Greater strategic flexibility. We don't have one way to do things. We have multiple ways to do things. More effective management of challenges. Prioritizing. A future time perspective. We start to get a perspective of where our decisions today could lead to in the future. A focus on potentially beneficial opportunities rather than risks. And cognitively correlates with visualizing successful outcomes to guide problem solving. Now, motivation has correlates as well. Motivation correlates with setting challenging goals, persist in striving to achieve goals, view obstacles as surmountable, as solvable, and attribute failure to controllable factors such as inefficient effort. If I tried harder, I could have done it. Emotional correlates, again, this is not cause and effect. These exist at the same time. So emotional correlates, there tends to be less worry and negative thinking about potential threats. The use of problem-focused coping to manage solvable problems and stresses. And the use of emotion-focused coping to manage stressful responses, such as seeking out social support, using humor and relaxation and exercises. And then the health correlates. There's more efficient immune system functioning. Very, very useful. Better physical and mental health. And then lastly, we can look at effective self-efficacy enhancement programs. The following are these types of programs are aimed at doing. They should help individuals master specific relevant skills relevant to their particular goals. You know, if you're sailing, you need to learn specific sailing skills to ensure that you can be quicker. Provide opportunities to observe skilled role models. Coach individuals in skill development and use. Facilitate emotional self-regulation. Now, this can occur both as a face-to-face with individuals and group formats, and it tends to be a little more effective in these face-to-face group formats than the digital formats. Okay, this is where I'm going to take a break and finish part 1. In part 2 next week, we're going to explore defense mechanisms. These are based on some of Freud's work and other work that's been done since him, and coping strategies as they relate to positive self. We'll see you next week, everybody. Bye now.